like chocolate?
All right.
Yeah.
We're live.
I'm afraid I do like chocolate.
We're live. So let's get started. I do want to make sure we all know each other.
I'm Ginger's mom.
That's going. I am Cindy Ripley. We go to the Heart UCC with Pastor Dan.
Okay.
Joe Ripley.
Cat Tate, right here.
Yep. PD.
Karen Hammond.
Judy Clements. Oh, sorry.
And Guy Clements.
Okay. Last week, as we explored the history of our United Church of Christ, I think we learned that it's far richer than just our United Church of Christ and its 65 years of existence. Indeed, we trace our roots back to Europe, to the Reformation, and of course even farther back to the Book of Acts and the foundation of the church through the Holy Spirit on that Pentecost day. And last week we used the image or the metaphor of trees, of saplings, of small trees, and a mighty oak, being our United Church of Christ. This week, I'd like us to change our image from trees to the body, and more specifically, the different parts of the body, but specifically our bones and our ligaments. And I'll say more about that as we move forward, but for starters, let's have a word of prayer, please. Holy God, we thank you for our time together, for this opportunity to share in fellowship and knowledge, to have our minds nurtured, to learn about our church, the United Church of Christ. Be with us and bless us one and all. Amen. So, within the metaphor, the image of the body, that's not an original notion to me. Indeed, of course, we might all remember that image of the body being the church flows from the Apostle Paul in his first letter to the believers in Corinth. And I want to read, just so we all remember the story. It's in chapter 12, and it starts at verse 12, and maybe we'll even take some turns because I've printed it in our handout this morning. I'll start. Just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of one part, but of many. Joe, can you continue for us?
Sure. Now, if the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not, for that reason, stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not, for that reason, stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts of the body, every one of them, just as God wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body.
Karen, can you continue?
Sure. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. And the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. And the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. But God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it.
Cindy?
Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. And God has placed in the church, first of all, apostles, second, prophets, third, teachers, then miracles, then gifts of healing, of helping, of guidance, and of different kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all have gifts of healing? Do all speak in tongues? Do all interpret? Now eagerly desire the greater gifts.
Thank you. I've always marveled at this image of the body, and I've used it in different ways throughout my 3+ decades. I used it at sports camp. It was a church, Illinois Conference church camp that I directed for 5 years. And I took liberty with Paul's words, and instead of parts of the body, I made different parts of a team using sport images instead of body images. It's, if I remember, it was this scripture that I preached my first sermon on, and so it's been special for me, and I think it's good that we remember it from time to time, that it does indeed take all of us to make the body of Christ live and breathe and move and have meaning and be about ministry locally and globally. And so I think it's a good image. I think it's a real good image. I think it's a good image for our denomination, the United Church of Christ, because we do have many different parts, many local congregations, which then in turn have many members and friends. We have associations and conferences. We have the national church, and we have General Synod. All of those parts, if we think in terms of the bones of a body, all of those different parts are held together by ligaments. Ligaments, I looked it up, so I think I'm pretty close, but you medical people can check me. Ligaments connect bone to bone. Good. So I looked it up just to make sure I had the right term. Because sometimes I get confused between ligaments and tendons. And tendons connect muscle to bone, I believe.
Is he right, Pat?
No. I'm going backwards again. Does anybody remember when this was just the Congregational church?
Yes.
Before we went to the UCC.
Yes.
And added together.
Yep. The UCC came into being on June 25th, 1957. In and around that date, the Hart Congregational Church voted yes to join the United Church of Christ. Here at Shelby, we took a little bit more time discerning, deciding, discussing. Probably in there too was a little bit of arguing.
And we still move that slowly today.
And
Deciding things.
We like our history.
and it was in 1961 that this congregation became a part of the United Church of Christ.
Not all congregations did.
Right.
There were many congregational churches that did not join the United Church of Christ and became continuing congregational churches. In fact, Michigan has the second largest number of those in the country.
That are still congregational?
Well, that at the time
Oh, okay.
decided not to become part of its greater thing. So Pat, you're exactly right. There was a lot of folks that said, yeah, we don't want to be, we're not sure of what this United Church of Christ is going to be. So
We valued our history.
well, I think there was a great fear because the bodies that were joining together were so different. The Congregational Church had one set of traditions, but the
Germans had another.
yes, and so I think there was great concern of what are we going to become? So yes, people valued that long tradition to say we don't know if we are comfortable with that.
So ligaments. I equate that body part that has flexibility yet connectivity. I find a parallel between our body's ligaments and our church's covenants. Just as ligaments, as I said, have flexibility and yet connectivity, so too with our covenants. Covenant is, I find covenant to be a holy word, a sacred word that provides, again, connectivity, but not necessarily authoritative power. It's connectivity between individuals and churches and all of that. I think I mentioned it last week, but I'm going to say it again because it is foundational to us. I think it's important that we remember that while our United Church of Christ, I think, continues to be an experiment, just as our country continues to be an experiment in how different people can find commonality and live next door to one another. In our church, we have our differing opinions, but we still have a covenantal connectivity with each other that binds us together as one. This notion flows from Jesus himself. When Jesus was with his disciples, this moment of deep prayer that Jesus entered into follows the Lord's Supper, the Last Supper with his disciples, where he shared symbols of his body and his blood. And in those two symbols we find covenantal connectivity, I think. But it was before Jesus was arrested and denied. It was before Jesus was put on trial, if maybe it can be called that. It was before Jesus was flogged. It was before Jesus carried his cross through town and was ultimately then nailed to it, and that cross planted at Golgotha, the skull. Jesus is in the garden praying. He prays for a multitude of things and people, but we find in John, Gospel of John, the 17th chapter, the 21st verse, the foundational scripture of our United Church of Christ. And I've got it written there. Jesus prays that they all may be one. Now, Jesus was praying for that for his disciples and those believers that would come after him, that they all would be one. And we can see through church history that Christian churches are amazingly, profoundly good at breaking apart, at severing those ligaments that hold them together. Gosh, Christians are good at breaking relationships with one another. It's one of our best things. But Jesus had this vision, and our United Church of Christ and the four become two bodies believed in that prayer of Jesus and wanted to make that prayer come alive in the United Church of Christ. That indeed German evangelicals and Swiss reformers, English pilgrims and Puritans and separatists, and Christian people from this country that were already here can in fact come together and be one church that is bound together by some basic beliefs about God, about Jesus, about the Spirit, about the Bible, about the church. We're going to get to those beliefs next week, in the next 2 weeks, but are bound together. So that's what gets us to this point of, okay, we're bound together, but how are we bound together? We know we're bound together by covenant, but what are all the different pieces that we try to have brought together as the body called the United Church of Christ? And as soon as I start thinking about this, are you all familiar with John Madden? He was the coach of the Oakland Raiders for a long time, but then I think he's better known as a football commentator, and put his name to the game Madden, which both of my boys had to have the latest version of every year. And so I think one of the things that Joe was known for is his charts. He would try to chart a play that the team was going to have, and he'd have his X's and his O's, and they would go up like this, and the wide receiver would come out like this, and the quarterback would fade back and throw the ball up there, and there'd be another wide receiver over there, and the running back would come up this way, and yeah, it's a mess. Can anybody understand our structure? Because, boy, that was fun. Can anybody make any sense out of our structure? And so I'd like to have you all take a stab at understanding our structure. And I've made little signs, 5 of them, with kind of the major sections of our structure. The word is polity. But, you know, that sounds like political.
Which doesn't go over well in this day and age.
Yeah, which is a dangerous word in this day and age. And so, you know, if we think about our structure, our organizational chart, if you will.
Are there United Churches of Christ in every state, or most every state, or?
I believe so.
Okay.
Even in Hawaii.
Okay.
And so I
Yeah, well, that again, our predecessor bodies had areas that were where most of the congregations were, but we didn't have any bodies that had a lot of congregations in the South and in the West.
Okay.
And so I suspect Pastor Dan is correct, because eventually people went everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, we were members of a church that was called Mayflower, that was in Billings, Montana. Nothing sailing to Billings, Montana. Okay? I mean, it is thousands of miles from any body of water you sail anything. But you know, so yeah, folks did eventually make
I
it
got to
there.
ask you if you knew Keith Torney.
Yes.
Yes, I knew Keith quite well. He was a pastor at the First Congregational and had retired.
Just a quick connection. Keith Torney, when I knew Keith, was the pastor of the Congregational Church in Naperville. And at that time, I was in my discernment process and felt like I needed to know if I was just drawn to the youth group at my home church, or whether this love of ministry and this love of serving would translate elsewhere. And so I knew Keith through my dad. Earlier in Keith's ministry, he was the director of what was called a neighborhood house on the south side of Chicago, Onward Neighborhood House. And my dad was on their board. And Keith would stop by our house occasionally to get paychecks signed by my dad. And so I sought out Keith. I'm Facebook friends with his one daughter, Kathy, who's a doctor in Oak Park, and his 2 stepsons, Jeff and Roger, who actually Jeff actually lives in Montana with his mom, Pat. But anyway.
We're all connected.
I was going to say,
Yes.
you have to stop and connect the dots.
Yes.
Right.
But it is part of the history that so many of the people that we know through their careers are because we have this connection of the greater church through these
Yeah.
five things.
That youth group at the Congregational Church in Naperville, we did a work camp to Jamaica, and so it's a fascinating group. But anyway, I've taken I've got 5 basic structures within our United Church of Christ. So I've got the local church, and then I've got associations and conferences, General Synod, and the National Church. And without going into a whole lot of detail about what any of those are, you probably at least know about the local church. And you may know about the association and conference. But I'd like you to work together. This will require standing up or kibitzing from your seat. Put those placards, they're just up with magnets. Put those placards in some kind of organizational structure or order as you understand the United Church of Christ.
I thought they were
Go.
already good.
That's what I thought. I thought.
I'm gonna let.
Here, I'll work the board. You tell me where to put stuff. I was a teacher.
Okay.
Putting her skills to good use,
All
keeping
right.
them honed.
Okay, what do you want at the top or at the bottom? I don't care where we start.
Well, yeah, there's 2 ways to look at organizational groups. Typically, what goes at the top is what the that's where everything
Descends from.
comes from.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
The
gotta be
head.
the national one then.
Well, I would
Oh,
I,
Oh, go ahead.
I would actually say,
You know the answers. No talking.
Yeah.
all right, I won't.
yeah, you do know the answers. Well, let's go let him talk.
That's just my opinion, though.
Okay.
All right, so National Church.
You got me, because like Karen, I thought they were correct the way they were.
Okay, so we liked them the way Pastor Dan had them. Are you sure about this one and this one? Where do these come?
Okay.
Those are kind
Joe
of.
gave us a clue, so I think National Church go. No, I've never heard of the National Church, so
It's
I
in
heard of everything
Cleveland.
else. What?
The national headquarters
Never heard of it.
is in Cleveland. It used to be in New
Okay.
York City,
Okay.
but now it is in Cleveland.
Yeah, so the National Church is what, like the publishing house that publishes books, that does curriculum, church curriculum, youth curriculum, that
But the
does.
head guy's not up there?
Yes,
Oh, the head guy's up there. Never heard of him.
John Dorauer is
Never
our
heard of him.
general minister and president, who is actually terming out at General Synod this year.
I'm pretty sure this is where Joe gets a pension check from every
Okay.
month. Is that correct?
Kind of.
Yeah, actually
Kind of.
not. That's a separate organization, but yeah.
I'll get there.
So what do we want to do with this?
Those 2 look good next to each other.
Just like equals?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Dan, take it over.
Anybody want to change anything?
Okay, maybe conference and association. I don't know. Okay. But Lillian is
Conference.
she
Conference,
conference?
yes.
And I think I'd switch
Conference.
conference and association. But I could be totally wrong.
Our association minister currently is Ruth Fitzgerald.
Does that help?
Okay.
She's retiring May 31st.
Then maybe they belong the way they were. Got any ideas? I think if I turn my page over, I'd see the correct answer. So I'm not going to cheat.
No, actually, this is something I came up with last night to do.
It's not on that paper.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is some participation by the group that came to me last night. So,
Okay, Ruth submitted her resignation to Lillian. So,
Okay.
then
So,
associate,
in the Michigan conference, there's more than just the Grand West Association. So that's right. There's multiple associations
Right.
that are all part of the Michigan
Okay,
conference.
so we
And
like
that's true, I think, in most parts of the
So who
country.
did this guy, who's also retiring, submit his resignation to?
the board of directors of the denomination.
Oh, they're not even on here.
But necessarily, he didn't really have to submit a letter of resignation because he's terming out.
Oh, terming out, okay.
Yeah.
but see, we have general synod meetings. Oh, do we have general or
Mhm.
general synod meetings? But don't we have like general synod meetings in Grand Rapids? But that doesn't mean they're. I thought they were just like area.
Well,
synod.
I can give you one, is these aren't always in Cleveland.
Right,
These is in Cleveland.
right.
These aren't always in Cleveland. Does that
So I think it's general synod is under national church. But whatever.
Hey, you're willing to say something, that's good.
And those meetings.
Has
happen.
anybody here served on a association or conference committee?
Mm-mm.
I think that's part of it. If somebody had done that as part of the church, then you get, this is all transparent to most folks, but if you serve on some of those, then you get the
Yeah.
dots connected a little bit.
Didn't we
a
go
little
to
bit.
what did we go to once? We went to a big. Was it
Let me
night?
try and bring some clarity. This is my opinion, and we're free. I think we're first of all, we might be falling victim to an organizational chart
Somebody telling us what to do.
like we're used to seeing in business that has a top-down hierarchy to it. And so in our United Church of Christ, the local church is necessarily kind of, sort of, where the power lies. But I'm not quite sure that it's fair to put the local church on top. Were you thinking about putting it on top?
I'd put it in the middle.
I was going to say,
There you
it's
go.
more of a circular.
Did you read my dream?
I did not read your dream.
I think that in some ways, and we've got to get our, this is where solid lines and dotted lines are handy. General Synod is a meeting that happens biannually and in different places. This summer is one of the years for General Synod, June 30th to July 4th in Indianapolis. I will be there as a delegate of the Michigan Conference. Conferences send delegates to General Synod. Okay? Although other visitors and guests can also attend. It's at General Synod that we worship together, we study together, we discern God's will together. And in some of those discernments, We will give direction, ministry, mission, programmable direction
Program director. Okay.
to the national church. Okay? Now, the local church and the association have that covenantal relationship as well. In the association, one of their most important committees is called the Church and Ministry Committee, or the Committee on Ministry. They are the group of people that interview candidates for licensure, for ordination, and some of the other, it's gotten so complicated. My ministerial standing is in the Grand West Association. That is a covenantal relationship. They have some authority over me and not.
But they're not the boss of me.
No. And necessarily, I'll take a chance here, neither is the local church. We are in covenant with one another. I have some skills, theoretically, that allow me deeper, greater understandings of sacraments, of biblical teachings, of all of that stuff. But you all have those understandings too. And so we learn together, just as we're doing today. We learn together. Yes, I administer the sacraments in a sister denomination called the Disciples of Christ. Their laity can administer the sacraments. Not so much in the United Church of Christ. That is a pastoral, ministerial function. Laity prepares. Pastors officiate. Pastors officiate weddings. Pastors, most of the time, officiate funerals, although that's not always the case. But the local church and the association is probably the most visible covenantal relationship here. I'm going to sit down. You get enough of an idea, because I could make this look like John Madden again if I try hard enough. And so as the churches both approach June 30th, connectivity with the association and the area conference minister, I'll talk in our terms of the Michigan Conference. Michigan Conference hires or calls, I like that word better, because this isn't a business, this is the church. And so the conference calls here in Michigan what we term as area conference ministers. That's what Ruth is for the Grand West Association. Because of Ruth's relationship with this church specifically, the conference minister, Dr. Daniel Lillian, will be working with this church with regard to search and call. Okay. Let's see, what else do I want to say? Associations work at holding the churches of that association, and these are geographic, usually. Geographic associations, holding those churches together so that support, so that ministry, so that mission, so that education can be shared kind of around those circles. There are two, for us in the Grand West Association, there are two association meetings a year. One in the spring, one in the fall. We have officers of the association and at least two committees. Again, the Committee on Ministry or Church and Ministry Committee. And for us in the Grand West Association, there's a program committee which does the work of planning our association meetings together. The Committee on Ministry can also call the association together for what's called ecclesiastical councils. That's when the association comes together to examine a candidate for ordination. It's a serious time and an important time. We, at least in my tenure here at Shelby, we've hosted two association meetings in my memory. Maybe it's only one. And at heart we haven't done any, but we've done two here. We've also hosted the association's committee meetings here as well. The conference, and you can follow along with this a little bit, the conference has some programming ministries that they are very much a part of, including the support of the association and the area ministers. With Ruth's announced retirement, Michigan Conference is down, what did Lillian say, 2 or 3 area ministers. And at least right now, as of yesterday when I talked to Lillian, she's not convinced that our current kind of deployed staff is the right way for Michigan to go right now. And so she's kind of reluctant to search for new area ministers right now. I encourage her to think in terms of interims, because you got to have some staff for the Committee on Ministry, especially. But the conference...
well, so for our association, just for everybody's kind of visual, that includes congregations from...
I would say that includes congregations as far south as Douglas, to Lowell, which is east of GR, up to Rockford. There is a church, a federated church up in Ludington. And then the Lakeshore is a pretty good boundary line.
What does federated mean? Sorry.
It's that's a good question. It's UCC, but it might have connection and connectivity to another body as well.
Okay.
The particular church is in downtown Ludington. I've actually tried to stop by a couple of times to meet the minister with no luck. So, Yeah.
So and that's part of the flexibility of the United Church of Christ is sometimes congregations are joined together from different traditions. So there are congregations that were American Baptist and Congregationalist, and some of them wound up with the Baptists, and some of them wound up saying, well, we want to be part of the United Church of Christ. So it was two different types. So that's happened with Presbyterians. That's happened. Methodists not as easily.
It happened with the Church of the Brethren out in Virginia Beach, a Christian church, the Christian sapling, and become UCC, and a Church of the Brethren congregation merged in Virginia Beach. They chose a new name of the Christian Church Uniting, which I think is wonderful. And it's not only because Cindy and I served there. Cindy being a Church of the Brethren pastor and me being a UCC pastor seemed a good fit for that congregation. We could speak both languages, and so
sometimes a federated church will alternate. So the one pastor might be called from the Congregational tradition, from the United Church of Christ, and then the agreement is the next pastor comes from the Presbyterian tradition or the Baptist tradition, that they're two bodies worshiping together, and they've got rules of how they can do that, but not many denominations can have that. Mostly you have to be just one way. Part of right. So that's another way that there's a ligament, I think, that attaches how churches are connected that's flexible.
that's also true when we think about search and call. Local churches can search outside of the United Church of Christ. There's a built-in mechanism for between the United Church of Christ and the disciples of Christ. I call it that we can cross-pollinate with each other. But necessarily, church can call from any denomination. If that happens, both the association and the conference would hope and pray for continued relationship, minimally, with the congregation. Maximally, perhaps even granting privilege of call status to that pastor from a different denominational background. So there are mechanisms in place.
But I think that's one of the nice things about the UCC is that our polity allows that kind of flexibility. When for example, the Catholic Church, not casting any aspersions, but you pretty much have to be a Catholic priest to lead a Catholic church. Our polity allows a Disciples of Christ person, a Presbyterian person. It can be worked out if that's who the church wants. If that's who the local church wants. There's a mechanism for allowing that to happen. That's one of the unique things I think about our denomination is that flexibility. Because in a lot of them, nope. If you didn't go to the Catholic cemetery or the Lutheran cemetery, Seminary. That's a different. That was a talk
That's later.
And we're the Congregational church.
Yeah.
But if you didn't go through schooling in their program, you can't serve their church. So that's a wonderful thing about us, a unique thing.
It's a unique thing, and it's a special thing. Can we think of, it's one of those blessing and bane things, I think. In fact, I think our whole structure is a blessing and a bane all at the same time. And it comes up as a bane sometimes when General Synod and or the National Church says something, and the local church doesn't agree. But, for example, the media will say, the United Church of Christ says. And unless you're a rocket scientist that can figure out John Madden's play, then you understand that to be the stance of the local church, and it may not be. And so there's blessing in our flexibility, but there's also bane in the very real potential for misunderstanding.
Such as the Green New Deal.
I was thinking that too.
Yes. Yes.
Well, so yeah, I think there's several things that come to my mind when you're talking about that. I think Winston Churchill said something about democracy that I think would apply to our church structure. And the quote is something along the lines of, it is the worst, least efficient system of government that has ever been organized by people anywhere, except for every other system that's been tried. So I think that could apply to our church governance. It is a mess that nobody understands,
But it works most of the time.
but it has advantages that others that I think is a strength for us. So it's terrible, except other ones are terrible in
Terrible
other ways. Right.
But they understand us. Right.
Well, it's as
to.
when you talk with people in other traditions, they want to say, well, who decides for the church? And this is a good diagram. Well, who decides for the church? And I think what Pastor Dan was just saying is when the General Assembly, after coming together and study and prayer, and sometimes there's committees that go on from one synod to the next, studying an issue, when they say, here's what we understand about this issue, most people say, well, that's the church, that's who speaks for the church. But that's not true for us, is it? Because the General Assembly, or the General Synod, speaks to the church.
Not for the church.
So when the General Synod decided, for instance, that women were humans and could be ordained too, which
What?
we were the first traditions that did that.
Yes.
Every congregation didn't immediately have a woman pastor.
And they
Because
didn't
the
have
General Synod said, here's how we understand Scripture and Christ's teaching, and conferences and associations listened to that, and then discerned their understanding, and congregations did the same. So no congregation was required to have a woman pastor once the General Synod said, we understand they are equally eligible for ordination. Ultimately, the congregation had to say, we see that too.
or we don't.
I believe to our benefit at both congregations, we both have had female servants. We had, I want to say, Bonnie as an interim, and we won't go into whether it's an up or down. And then we had Pastor Ruth for 4 years. Similarly, Hart had first, and many of you will know, Reverend Shirley Heeg, a Reformed Church of America ordained pastor. Hart was her first congregation. After serving there, she went to Minneapolis for a spell, and now she's back and retired and has preached. And Ruth and I have, not Ruth, Shirley, and I have shared funerals together and all kinds of things. Following Shirley at Hart came Pastor Lorraine, who many of you might know as well, and who tragically passed away while serving.
What was her last name?
Pardon me?
What was her last name?
Baucom.
Yeah, okay.
And so both congregations have been blessed by a female ministerial perspective, pastoral presence. And I do think it's a blessing for churches.
And some came ordained, some came as licensed, correct?
So, and necessarily we have the UMCs. Mears Shelby is served by Pastor Bev now, who is licensed to those two churches. What that means is she cannot perform ministerial functions other than for those two churches. And then we have Pastor Sid up in Hart, who is an MDiv, fully ordained Methodist pastor.
Does she also serve the Scottville or?
No, just Hart.
Just Hart, okay.
Just
because
Hart.
Before they did a share with.
Sydney is a she?
Yes.
Sid is a she, yes.
Sydney.
Sydney Idsinga. I want.
So why do we have the national church if the general synod kind of hears the leadings of the Spirit to decide on issues?
One of the things that the national church does is it is the national church. The national church is the voice of the United Church of Christ in ecumenical and interfaith relationships. Who knows the difference between ecumenical and interfaith? Ecumenical is Christian bodies, including RC, Roman Catholic. Ecumenical associations would be Christian bodies of faith. Interfaith is Christian, Jewish, Muslim, just to name the three Abrahamic denominations. Buddhist, Hindu, Sikh, and so that is one thing that the general minister and president, now John Dorauer, soon to be, and I can't remember who's being nominated to that. It is a single nomination, so we kind of know already who the new person is going to be, but that will become official this summer. John would represent us in those broader ecumenical and interfaith settings. The national church helps us with UCC curriculums through our Pilgrim. Thank you, Pilgrim Press publishing house. It helps us with providing tools and resources to increase our sensitivity to local, that being country, and world issues like hunger. These are big issues, like equality, like ministry and equality for Native Americans, Mexican Americans. Yeah, board understandings of immigration at the border. The national church is active in those things and prepares materials for local churches, associations, and conferences if local churches, associations, and conferences wish to utilize them.
I think there's one other way, as a layperson, that
Mhm.
things might become, maybe, you can tell me if this is right. This is a meeting.
Yes,
These are always here. The
yes,
national church is all, you can call any day and talk to someone.
yes,
This, you
Every
can't
other
call
year.
anybody at the general
Yep.
synod. It's a meeting.
yeah,
Not that there aren't people always preparing for the one that's coming up and the next one, but this as an office.
Yep.
This, if you call the church.
that's
in
a
Indi-
conference center someplace.
Right. If you call this in Indianapolis, they'll be able to give you some answers about this year's,
Particular.
but they
upcoming-
can't tell you about the
That's
next
right.
one.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I think that
and-
helps you understand is this is a meeting.
Being
This
a-
is an office.
Yeah, being a
These are offices.
I used to be a part of the Indiana-Kentucky Conference. In fact, and Joe, it all would become more clear if you've served. I served both in the association in Northwest Indiana. It happened to be named the Northwest Association. Very creative.
But Joe was in that same conference too, serving in Kentucky.
Yeah.
So even though there were two different states, they were.
Yeah. The Indiana-Kentucky Conference, and they are very busy as a conference and as a conference office preparing to host General Synod.
Because it's close to that.
Until I got elected to be a delegate for Michigan Conference, I was going to go help them. I was going to volunteer.
So the other thing that I would chime in at is, so why do we need associations and conferences in
Great
the national
question.
church?
Actually, there have been that I have not necessarily been a part of, but have heard about. There have been some talks about specifically conference. Power, any power that there is within the church rests in the association with their church and ministry committee or committee on ministry, whichever way they choose to define, call themselves. And so there is a notion of, well, what do we really need the conference for? I don't think I have an opinion on that. To be perfectly honest, when do you all have to take off?
12:30.
12:30.
Okay, it's what, about 12 right now?
Yeah, just a
It's
few
about
minutes
5 after. something
Okay.
like that.
This is a good discussion, but I want, if it's okay, if not, y'all can read about it and I'll give a test next week. About
Good
the
luck answering that.
offerings.
Okay.
The offerings in our church here in Shelby, we have the wider community offering. And that is administered by the diaconate board. For denominational giving, there is OCWM, our church's wider mission. Those monies fund the ministries and missions and staff of conference and national church. Each conference, shoot, and I forgot to ask Lillian this yesterday, each conference will have what they call a retention rate. Local churches will send, if they choose, send their OCWM, our wider church's mission. Is that right?
Churches,
You
Thank you.
got all in there.
My mind is a jumble like Madden. Churches will send their OCWM dollars to the conference. The conference will forward then a percentage of those dollars onto the national church. Yes, local churches can support directly the national church as well, but within the OCWM confines, that's how the flow goes. And so, and I forgot to ask, certainly retention rates have been changing and almost reversing over the decades. In the beginning, maybe the retention rate for the conference was we'll retain 25% and forward 75% on to the national church. Those were the days. Now it's at least probably flip-flopped, where the conference will retain 75% and forward 25%.
And they get to decide what they're going to do.
Pardon me?
They get to decide what they're
The
going to do.
the conference meeting decides the retention rate. I remember leading Indiana Kentucky conference through that when I was the president of their board, through a change in our retention rate. I think it was from we felt like we needed it to go, I think, from 75 to 80%, and it was not an easy vote.
Well, I think
the other thing is when a local church sends money to the national church, what they do with it is not hidden. You can go on the website and find exactly which programs they're funding, which ministries they're funding. And you can be sure it is really going to those places. Nobody's skimming anything off the top, and they're, like if you know how a lot of money we sent to Pakistan didn't go to where the people, they went to the leaders or whatever, Taliban.
Yep.
When that national church does make sure it's going where they said it was going to go. So one way that I feel good about giving to OCWM or whatever is I can count on it going where they said. And I don't have to do the work to figuring that out. Somebody else is sitting up there in Cleveland actually figuring that out. So, you get calls all the time. Will you fund this? Will you want to contribute? Well, when I contribute to these ministries of the church, I know where they're going. I mean, they are going where they said. And if I want to know, you can go on the website and look it up.
A couple
It's
clicks
easy,
away.
but you can.
Yeah, it's just a couple clicks away.
Right.
But the point I was going to make is one of the connections is that conferences and the national church help local churches do ministry.
Yes.
So it would be hard for us here in Shelby, Repart, to fund a missionary in Afghanistan. I mean, there's missionaries there that help with all kinds of things, education and health-related ministries. But it would be really hard for us to do that.
Yep.
But by working through the conference in the national church,
Pooling those funds.
that's what
It'll
those
have a
bodies do.
bigger
And so,
impact.
so the conference does the same thing. Ministries that are done on the behalf of local congregations, we all pool a little bit, and the conference is more efficient at then collecting and doing those ministries. And How the conference decides where it's going to go is local churches send delegates to the
General
conference, well, to the conference
Conference
meetings
meeting.
to say,
Here, that's
where
usually
should
in
we-
October.
yeah, how, so camp ministries used to be a big issue of how are we going to fund camp ministries, and where, what priority do those play?
And that's really
And-
changing too.
Yes, it is.
But that's one where each local church would be hard to have a church camp, but a conference can afford one, and then how the funds are spent, the conference decides, which actually means the local churches decide. Dr. Daniels doesn't decide, it's representatives from the local congregations get together and review it and pray about it and decide, here's how we can most effectively do ministry. So that's what those groups do, is they help local congregations participate more widely in those ministries of healing and justice and relief.
And also then, in special, besides these 5 ways to contribute, sometimes you'll hear about the greater church is funding Pakistan relief or Syria, Turkey, earthquake relief.
Ukraine.
And you can put it on your check, earthquake relief. It is not going through, it might be going through one of those, but it is specifically designated to go with our contributions to the earthquake. That's why you write in your memo, and then when the local church sends it
folks
in,
actually
it
look at
says,
that.
these are earthquake.
And follow those
funds.
directions.
Right, that's right.
We have within the United Church of Christ a designation called 5 for 5. Both of the churches are 5 for 5 churches. In addition to OCWM, there is a special offering taken for 1 great hour of sharing. That actually is a very ecumenical sharing that helps people in need throughout the world, throughout the country and the world. Strengthen the Church gives grants to churches. Both congregations last year received from the conference, and all we had to do was apply for it. We didn't have to, and I did that on behalf of both churches, and both churches got $2,000 from the conference to do with whatever they wanted. The Strengthen the Church, Neighbors in Need, also gives grants for special ministries that local churches might have with their neighbors. For example, this church likely could perhaps apply for a grant for our community breakfast if we, would want to seek some extra funding that way. And then there's the Veterans of the Cross, also renamed as the Christmas Fund. And that helps not only retired clergy that are struggling, that perhaps didn't have churches contribute to their pension funds and find themselves in need of housing, living expenses, things like that. It's also available now to active clergy who suddenly might find themselves, don't get any ideas, unemployed. That kind of thing. And so
A sick child.
yeah, that's 5 for 5. Also tossed in there is Q. The United Church of Christ has affiliation with several colleges and universities throughout the country. We, being
Let me disturb you just long enough and take a breath.
it's good to see you, Pat.
See you next time.
All right, good stuff.
Okay.
Same bat time, same bat station. And our regional, Great Lakes regional seminaries are Chicago Theological Seminary in, amazingly enough, Chicago. Just a side note, our conference minister, Lillian Daniel, is an adjunct professor at Chicago Theological Seminary teaching this very stuff that we're doing right now. She teaches history, UCC history and polity at the seminary level. The other, one of the others is United Theological Seminary, and that's located in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And then the third is Eden Theological Seminary, and that's located in St. Louis. And so when we designate money to Q, the UCC naturally loves acronyms. Did I say that right?
Yes.
We love our, and that's why actually I ABCs of the UCC. And so there's Q. And those are kind of the 5 or 6 big opportunities for local churches and individuals to give to. I'm going to keep rolling because there's a third, there's another piece of this. I've talked about the 4 special offerings plus Q plus OCWM. And unique, I think, for us in the Grand West Association, there is also the best way I can describe it is a per capita request for funding by the Grand West Association. Every year, each church, our 2 included, receive a letter asking for a contribution in the amount of $3 for each member on the membership rolls. For our church here in Hart, I'm going to round and say that's about $300. Right now
Shelby.
with part,
Shelby.
what
Yeah,
I
Shelby.
You said hard.
We understood what
just,
you meant.
just keep
We
up.
just,
94.
I've talked for over 60 minutes here, so are you sure it's 94? I think it's 92 since we just had 2 deaths, but what do I know?
Oh, she's checking. She's going to be mad at you this afternoon.
82. 282.
282.
Oh, the amount.
Yeah.
Okay. Hart, I don't know the number of members we have. I would have to look at an annual report, and then I know more here because I keep the roll, and I don't at Hart.
I think one interesting fact about the per capita amount is often churches clean their rolls. And they take off people, and every church in the UCC sets their own criterion. If you haven't seen them, if they haven't contributed, if they don't have a kid in school, if grandma still doesn't go here, if nobody's had a funeral, okay, there's a whole bunch of kind of spurious reasons that you might be removed from the roll. Then they do that, not because they're trying to say, we don't like you anymore because you don't come. They're trying to reduce the amount of money they have to send in because
do
it's
that.
a cost.
We absolutely
Right,
do
But
that.
people often don't understand why they've been removed. For example, in my home church, which is in Ohio, it is the UCC, was Congregational, they removed my older sister, okay, who no longer lived in the area, who didn't have any children in there, who hasn't given any money for decades, who doesn't ever come to church, who hasn't had a funeral or a wedding or anything. She was so offended.
Mm-hmm.
And when I tried to explain...
but I've always
This-
been a member there.
Right, but I tried to explain to her, but we have to pay for you, and we can't if you're not giving any money. Oh, that caught no mustard with her.
Wow.
Exactly.
But people don't understand why churches clean their rolls, and they clean them because we have
It's
to
$3.
We have to pay. Right.
Right. It's
And
not
I think there are probably other reasons than that.
Well, there are other reasons,
but then the
Right.
financial. But and usually churches in their constitution and bylaws have various systems
for doing that.
in place to remove and
And you get a
like
letter.
the system here is quite arduous
Yes.
and
Yes.
time consuming.
Yes.
I mean, we're talking take a name off the roll and they're not dead. That could take over a
And
year.
it's not your pastor who decides the criteria.
Right.
So what we've done is we've really taken hold of the oxymoronic title of inactive member. You can't be both, but we do it anyway. And the council can simply move people. Oh, I'm
To the
back
other
now.
role.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll just move you back.
And in the end, most churches send out a letter saying,
Mhm.
we're going to remove you from our roles unless you
Right.
request us not to.
Yep.
All you have to do is say, please don't remove me.
Mhm.
You still don't
And
have
it's
to go
usually
or
a-
ever show up or ever
A stamp addressed postcard.
Right.
Mhm.
And they won't remove you if you say I don't want to be
Yeah.
removed, even if you haven't been
But-
there for
But
50
I think
years.
that's another piece though of our structure is a recognition that many
Yeah, I think
congregations
we covered
are
it all.
smaller congregations. And so when it comes to how do we support the ministries at the association and conference level, if you're doing it by the members in the church, obviously then churches that are larger contribute more.
Mhm.
And so it's a way of
More equitable.
right. It's a more equitable way, recognizing that most churches are smaller.
And I think you can see the problem. So Hart has been there 155 years. If we've never cleaned the rolls, that's really hard for the 50 of us that are left to pay for the biggest years we've ever had
Yep.
in membership. So there
When
is
no
a,
one's now currently. they're
And
not.
as far as
Right.
I am aware, in the last 6, almost 7 years, we haven't
right.
done that.
And I'm kind
at
of warning
Hart.
you, because often when there's a new pastor is when this gets looked
It's
at
all-
again. You know, often when you get new leadership, it's a time that leadership at your church goes, well, maybe we should look at our roles.
Yep.
And so it helps if you as lay people understand, oh, but we're doing it for this reason, not to cut you out of your,
It's a great role for an interim
right.
to spearhead, because not many of us like to have that hit to the church
Take the
membership
wrath.
number
Right.
on our watch.
That's right. That's right. It's always a great job for
Or the wrath of someone.
But I'm just saying, the more of you who understand why it's being done, you can help your fellow parishioners understand. And you can say, oh, if you want to stay on the rolls, just say you want to stay on. You don't have to do anything different.
I had this bizarre incident one day when I was still working here in Shelby, and a woman from the Methodist church, who she never attended, but there'd been a second marriage for her and her husband. Second husband passed away, and she got this letter, and she comes in, I'm going over there. And she was just like,
Yelling at you.
she's yelling at me, and I said, please sit down.
It's very upsetting to people. So the
It
more of
is,
the
yep.
the more of your congregation that understands the reasons, the less hurt they'll be. And you can assure somebody they don't have to be taken off.
Yep.
All they have to say is, I want to stay on.
Yeah.
They don't have to do anything else.
Please keep me.
Right.
Yep.
As far as active membership, I kind of have a 3-pronged or fork. To stay active, you attend worship, or you give, or you receive communion. You're a communicant person. That last one is certainly not solely for, but it has shut-in members in mind. That, well, you can't attend, and you're on Medicaid, and
Right, can't give any more
and,
money.
and so, but this is your, so that's kind of my, as I say, my three-pronged or litmus test.
But sort of, it gets like, I think her grandkid came 2 Easters ago. Oh, keep her on the rolls. That's the kind of thing that happens.
Yeah.
So it's like, panic. Will they be offended?
I've done more baptisms up at Heart of people that we never saw prior and we've never seen since. But by gosh,
Oh, yeah.
my grandchild has to be baptized in my church. And we do that.
So,
We do
so
that.
from what you heard to say today, one of the trick questions that we sometimes ask people is, who is it that decides who's going to be the pastor of the church?
The local church.
So the congregation decides who the pastor's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
However, the association decides whether or not that individual has qualifications to be the pastor. And so that's one
Even
of
at
those
the conference level, they'll do, if it's somebody from another denomination, at the conference level, Lillian would check with that other denomination, asking for background.
Right.
Have you done a background check on this person lately? Y'all know it. I'm working on my ministerial profile, and I had to lay out $175 for a background check.
Criminal records check.
Yeah.
But it's,
So they
but
are
it's
careful.
one of those things where some congregations think that we have all the say, and the answer is, well, yes, but no. It's one of those ligaments that the association decides who is it that has the qualifications and character to serve, and the congregation still has to call the person.
And
But-
even if you have a search committee, you still get to vote.
Yep.
The search committee says, well, we think her. And you can go, no, we think not. And, okay, then they have to go back to work. Usually another committee has to be formed, but yes.
Guy was on, I'm sorry, I don't remember, but Guy was on the search committee for me, that brought me to Shelby and Hart.
And surprisingly, I don't know if this is true for you, we even the church, many churches you always served, you still remember the 5 or 6 people or 9 people who were on the search committee. Even years later, you go, oh yeah, they were on the search committee. They were on the search committee.
Mm-hmm.
You get to know the person on the search committee because you talk
You
with
talk
them
to them a lot,
numerous
yeah.
times,
Yeah.
and of course the search committee talks to numerous people too.
People as
So
well.
there's, but that's one of those places where the covenant thing that Pastor Dan was talking about.
It helps.
It's not one or the other.
It's
It's
everything
It's both.
in our denomination.
it's
It
both.
helps. And it helps us.
Covenant, ligaments, flexibility with connectivity, covenants. They really are everything. Particularly in Christianity, I'd say, but particularly in our United Church of Christ.
And it's unique.
And it is unique.
Very unique.
So, that's what we've got. Can somebody pray us out of here? I don't even know what time it is. Are we?
We're good.
We're good.
12:31.
We're good.
So, can somebody pray us out?
Let's do the Lord's Prayer.
Lord's Prayer? Okay. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. I paused just slightly after Our Father, wondering if Guy would jump in.
Our little mom, just little mom.
I mean, were you there for that particular Sunday morning
No, I
where
don't think so.
we did I did a kind of a skit
Can you
with
talk about the Helper Project before you go now?
Yeah, I just want to get this out there.
over the Lord's Prayer, Our Father, and then over a microphone from somebody that you can't see. Yes.
Oh, that's cool.
That was,
His
yeah.
name was Guy. Guy played
Yeah, you
God.
have a good pulpit. That's good.
Right.
You know, I couldn't get George Burns because he was dead, so I got Guy.
I don't know if that's a compliment.
That
or
was my
not.
qualification.
Yeah.
I was still alive.
Hope to see folks next week.